Welcome, mothers and others. As we always call Mothers Against Greg Abbott, we say mothers and others. So welcome, mothers and others. We're so excited tonight. We are going to have a very interesting conversation about Roe v. Wade 50 years later and what it means to Americans and Texans, and where do we stand now and how do we move forward. We have three great panelists with us tonight. First, we have Louise Joy. Louise Joy is a partner at Joy & Young, LLP, and practices in the regulatory, licensing, and administrative areas of health law. She is a board-certified administrative law lawyer by the State Board of Legal Specialization. Louise speaks regularly on health law topics and has taught health law at the University of Texas School of Law as an adjunct law professor. She served as a director of American Health Lawyers Association from 2002 to 2008, and as a member of the Health Law Examination Committee of the Texas Board of Legal Specialization from 2002 to 2007. Welcome, Louise. We are so glad you're here. Louise, you are a personal friend of mine, and you often have reached out to me to discuss legal rulings, and your expertise is highly dependent on and valued, especially when we have a climate that tends to be kind of, in Texas, it tends to be very like, oh my gosh, this thing happened. And I find you to be calming in the storm of reproductive justice. So I'm so glad you're here and that we're going to get some great viewpoints from you. And we're excited. To learn all of your expertise.
Thank you.
Next up is Robin Marty. Robin is the operations director for the West Alabama Women's Center, a full spectrum reproductive health clinic services serving Alabama and the surrounding region. Robin has spent a decade tracking abortion restrictions, visiting current and former clinic sites, and interviewing activists on both sides of the abortion divide. Robin is also the co-author of the 2019 book, The End of Roe v. Wade: Inside the Right's Plan to Destroy Legal Abortion. We are so lucky to have Robin Marty with us tonight. Honestly, I can't put her book down, and I think it's essential for every person's library who is concerned about reproductive rights. I mean, I've been reading it for a week, and every single time I pick it up, I learn something new. And so I just cannot say enough about Marty's book. We'll talk about it as we go along. Okay. Next up is Blake Rocap. Blake has worked for the Texas has worked with hold on a second, Blake, give me a second. I'm going to do you some good justice. Blake has worked in or with the Texas legislature since 2007. He is the legislative counsel for AVOW, that was formerly NARAL, Pro-Choice Texas. He focuses on his advocacy on abortion rights and reproductive health care. He is a former board member, volunteer attorney, and current legal director of Jane's Due Process, and is the immediate past president of the board of Everybody Texas, the largest Title X grantee in Texas. He is a member of health law and legislative campaign law sections of the state bar and is one of only 13 attorneys on the state board certified in legislative and campaign law. Welcome, Blake. We are so glad you're here, and your background and your background is impeccable, and your work with AVOW and Jane's Due Process is so impressive. So I was really excited to get to meet with you today because I think you can give us some insight into this next legislative session. And we're really excited about that because that's really what Mothers Against Greg Abbott is all about right now. So thank you all so much. First, we're going to start out with a question for all three of you. And you all can give just a 1 to 2 minute response on each of these questions. But let's have a conversation about abortion in Texas and even abortion across the United States. How has the lack of abortion access affected Texans and other women in other states that have also banned abortion in the months since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade with the Dobbs ruling? Let's go ahead and we'll start with Blake.
Thanks. I was going to say we should start with Robin because she probably has the most
direct experience. Unfortunately, a lot of the funds and my clients in Texas aren't providing direct support at the moment for people that have to travel to get out of state to get the abortion care they need. So I know that the Texas Policy Evaluation Project is tracking how many Texans are going out of state and trying to see if they can determine how many folks are being forced to continue their pregnancies. But I think it's a little, overall, it's a little early to tell, and I don't have as much knowledge of that because of the infirm status of the Texas law, right? There's the Attorney General has threatened to prosecute everyone for helping folks get out of state. So until the federal court says he can't do that, my clients have kind of paused their support operations a bit.
All right, Robin, since he mentioned you, let's find out from somebody who's working in a clinic. How is this affecting you?
It's real bad. Oh God, it's so bad. So first of all, thank you, obviously, for inviting me to this. I know I'm an out-of-stater. But one of the things that I think a lot of people have forgotten in this country is the fact that Texas was 6 months ahead of everyone when it came to this ruling and abortion going illegal. So in a lot of ways, we're watching what is happening in Texas, knowing that that's where we're going to end up soon. A lot of people don't know this, but Alabama, our clinic especially, ended up being one of the places that Texans, especially Gulf Coast Texans, were coming to right before the Dobbs ruling came down. Our clinic in particular, we had managed to, because Louisiana was full and Mississippi was full, and we had spoken with the state and got approval to change our informed consent process so that we were able to provide informed consent materials in the mail. And that way a person only had to make one trip to see a doctor at the clinic, and you could get it mailed to your home, and that would start the 48-hour wait process. So because of that, at the point in which Dobbs happened and abortion shut off in Alabama, we were probably seeing at least 10 to 20 patients from Texas every week. And that was significant. Like, that was how many patients we used to get from Mississippi, which was right on our border. So that tells you how much this backup had happened. Right now, we are just 7 months into no legal abortion in our area. It's still very new. It hasn't quite gotten to the point where we have people who were denied abortions who are giving birth quite yet. Also, we know that the first couple of months of Dobbs, because there was so much in and out action in the states surrounding us, a lot of people were still trying to go and get care in other states, were able to get care in other states. That's not happening anymore. We know that between our Attorney General making numerous threats against people who are pregnant, there are less people who are leaving. Our abortion fund is not able to help people because we have been told that it's a criminal conspiracy. Quite frankly, we've been told at our clinic that assisting anyone who is looking for an abortion would be a criminal conspiracy. And that's something that we're going to start pushing back on this year, because we believe it's a First Amendment right to be able to provide information. So that's going to be a big change for us. But what we are seeing is that in Alabama, people are resigned, and it's heartbreaking because they don't see this as something that they can really fight anymore. Getting across the state to our clinic was already so difficult to get an abortion. Trying to go 4 states over in order to get one now is insurmountable. And in all honesty, the population that we serve is a population that is used to the government doing things like this. They are used to the government taking advantage of them. They're used to feeling like this is just one more thing that has happened to them that they can't fight against. And so it is devastating to see the people who are coming in and are just resigned, and they know that this is what's going to happen. And all they can think about is, I hope that I survive this pregnancy. And I hope if I do, that I can find some way to keep my family together.
Wow. It's heartbreaking. Absolutely. It's absolutely heartbreaking. All right, Louise.
So from my standpoint, some of the things that I've seen that I think it's important for everyone to keep in mind. The ban on abortion does not just stop with the effect it has on elective choice abortions, which should be allowed, but it impacts every person, regardless of their stand on abortion, when it comes to care of individuals who are pregnant. We're seeing in Louisiana, there are doctors in Louisiana that are refusing to take care of patients in the first 12 weeks of their pregnancy. They do not want to care for people until after the 12-week mark is passed, so that they are not facing a concern about what's going on if they're managing a miscarriage. And I point out to people as I'm talking about this, I've been a healthcare attorney and was involved in healthcare for over 30 years. And my healthcare kind of work and background goes on well before that. And one of the terms that everyone should know is miscarriages are colloquialism to refer to loss of a pregnancy. Abortion is the medical term for spontaneous abortion, missed abortion, incomplete abortion, septic abortion. All of those are the medical term of abortion, and it's loss of a pregnancy. We have in this country, the statistics I looked at, we have over 900,000 ER visits per year for early pregnancy loss, which would be miscarriage. In all those cases, what we have in Texas right now, when Ken Paxton chose to challenge guidelines that was put in place to just deal with medical care that is necessary for individuals experiencing loss of a pregnancy, he threw into question, how is it that doctors can manage these? And so that leads doctors to have significant concerns about how to manage a miscarriage. What the treatment that you give, the medications are similar, the procedures are similar. The confusion that could occur for somebody being considered to have experienced an elective, what might be illegal under their state law, whether it be Alabama, whether it be Texas, whether it be any of the states that have banned it, and they've gone and they simply experience a miscarriage out of state, they could be accused of having caused their own pregnancy loss. So we've got a lot going on that I think that the anti-abortion side of things has not woken up to understand. This impacts them. It impacts their sisters, their friends, their all sorts of people in their lives that they never imagined. And it's almost too late for them now, for if they experience these kinds of emergencies, that they won't get the care that they need.
Wow, thank you. That does seem very serious. And it actually brings up one of the questions I actually had for you. And since you were just talking about it, let's go right ahead and dive into that question. So in Texas, I mean, how can doctors treat pregnant Texans today? I mean, what is legal, what is not legal? What limitations do we currently have?
I mean, as far as the legality of their ability to treat, they should be able to treat individuals experiencing miscarriage. But the fact that the treatments that they can give individuals experiencing miscarriage cross over into the areas of treatment for whether it's a medication abortion or the procedures, if it's a dilation and evacuation, or DNC, dilation and curettage, those procedures end up not being given in the ways they may have been given in the past, because there's a concern. If you have an inevitable loss of a pregnancy where you have a woman who has complete rupture of membranes, the pregnancy is not viable, but there is still a detectable fetal heartbeat, they would think, well, maybe we need to engage in expectant waiting. Waiting until there is no heartbeat. But in the meantime, you've got a woman who is much more exposed to experiencing infection and hemorrhage, and really harmful consequences of not proceeding with providing the care that she needs. The expectant waiting, we had, going back to what Robin said, that Texas had 6 months before. UT Southwestern and Dallas did a study where they were comparing using expectant waiting and providing either medication or surgical assistance for intervention when they've identified a person who's experiencing a miscarriage. And so, or an inevitable loss of their pregnancy. And they have found that expectant waiting is much more, there are much more increased risks of that than proceeding with providing either the medications or the surgical intervention, which now they're being more concerned about moving ahead and providing that care. And we've had some situations where we've been asked to look at a situation where somebody was experiencing inevitable loss of a pregnancy, but there was a fetal heartbeat, and it led everybody to do things that they would never have been concerned about doing before this law going into effect.
If I can just follow up on what Louise is saying.
Yeah.
So from a clinician standpoint, one of the things that we've been very careful about, because our law is so similar to Texas's law, is because we have no like explainable exceptions. We just know that it's life of the pregnant person, and that's it. So we have been told that non-viable pregnancies do not count as abortions, and as such, we've had to go through and set up very specific protocols for how we deal with miscarriages, knowing that somebody will probably end up going through every file that we have that is a miscarriage management file. And so we have rules as to a person has to have an ultrasound with no cardiac activity. Obviously, if that happens, that's a miscarriage. We can manage that. Otherwise, if a person is having bleeding, we have to have them do lab work that is blood work one day, and then they have to wait 48 hours and come back and do the blood work again. And if the number of the pregnancy hormone is the same or going down, then we can justify and go ahead and do a miscarriage. But one of the things that has been really frustrating and frightening to us is the fact that these exception rules have been set up essentially to manage all people into going into emergency rooms. So anybody who might go to an abortion provider because they did not want to continue a pregnancy, or would go see a provider because they think that they're having an issue with their pregnancy, and they don't necessarily want to have the expense of an ER, or they don't have insurance, or all of these other things. These are people who are going into emergency rooms. They might not be dealing with a doctor who has the type of experience in doing these sort of procedures that somebody who literally does nothing but 10, 20, 30 of these a week for the last decade have. And so it's very upsetting to us to know that in reality, the Attorney General, everybody has set this up to be at their own discretion, that, you know, if they go into a hospital and say, okay, this was happening, that hospital's not going to get in trouble. That doctor will be okay, except they're too scared to actually do the procedures. And they're the ones who are going to be the most likely to accidentally do something wrong. Whereas we have all of this ability, we have all of this talent, we have the resources, and we have the expertise, and we're going to be second guessed and potentially lose our license over it.
That's a really good point, and one I definitely had not thought about before, but I think that's a really good point. I just, wow. And you're completely right. You're completely right. The level of care that they would get from somebody who has a lot of experience is just going to be vastly different from somebody who doesn't have that much experience with this, especially in an emergency room situation. So I think you're completely correct there. Wow.
And the
yes.
point that Robin's just made about training is a huge issue we still don't know what the rules are for training medical residents in Texas who are with UT Health Science Center, or a number of our training programs, who it's no longer legally it's not legal for them to provide these services, but they need to learn how to perform these services. They don't get the experience. The out-of-state programs don't know what to do as far as accepting them. They've never had this kind of, can a UT resident even rotate through New York training program? And how do they get this experience if it's illegal? And if we've got a Texas Attorney General that says any of this provision of trying to get out of state, or our Texas legislature, means you are violating the law, are they going to be considered in violation of Texas law for seeking to do those out of state?
That's an excellent viewpoint as well. That's you're making a great point there. How it really affects not just the women who are having the miscarriages or the abortion, but also the doctors, their training, their education. So that kind of brings me to Blake. So the question I have for Blake is, like, you work in the legislature, lots of experience working in the legislature. Where do you see where we could possibly have some movement in the ledge right now to protect women, to further protect doctors, and protect women who are having miscarriages, and to really account for exceptions this go round? Because Greg Abbott's gone on TV saying, oh, we want to protect a mother if her life is on the line, and we are here to protect mothers, but the code is written such that it doesn't feel like it's protection. So what could the ledge do this session to help doctors and to help women who are having miscarriages, abortions, etc.?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in Texas, we have, like Robin alluded to, a medical emergency exception, which accounts for the life, and we think of it as kind of a life and health exception, but it's all couched of medical emergency. It's one exception to the abortion ban. And so clarifying that exception, I think, is something that is necessary. And I think it is something that there may be some desire to do because of the lack of clarity, as Louise described, around when you can provide care, or even the fact that it's forcing physicians to provide below the standard of care. Whereas if the pregnancy were clearly going to be a spontaneous abortion, then the safest way is to terminate the pregnancy without that expectant waiting. And that's currently really not allowed under Texas law. You sort of have to wait until you have absolute fetal demise before you can intervene. And so kind of changing that exception, I think, is somewhere where there might be some, or at least some willingness to clarify it,
Mm-hmm. Now, are there any bills right now that are asking for this clarification that have been, entered into the ledge?
Yes,
so far?
Senator Alvarado has filed a bill that I think changes the medical emergency exception. And she's also filed a bill that adds an exception for sexual assault, rape, and incest.
Great.
So we'll see where those go. I have less sort of hope for adding the exception for sexual assault, just because there is this really virulent extremism that that is not a good enough reason to have an abortion. That the complete basis of the anti-abortion movement, of course, is to value the life of the fetus more than the pregnant person, and that's just the perfect encapsulation of it, is their unwillingness to entertain an exception for rape or incest, to just elevate that fetal life above and beyond what the pregnant person wants or needs.
Okay, thank you. We talked a little bit with Robin earlier about the stresses that abortion clinics in states are going through right now, when they're trying to protect women who come into their clinics, and they're taking an influx of clients from different states. I was just traveling to go see my family in New Mexico, and so I'm driving into Las Cruces from El Paso, and there's very nice, very subtle signs on both sides of the freeway with billboards from Planned Parenthood that say New Mexico is abortion-free state. And I was really impressed. I didn't break out my camera fast enough to take a picture. I wanted to, but I was really impressed by that. And I have, did talk to my friends in New Mexico and said, well, what are you seeing? And they said, well, we definitely have a lot more tourists coming into Texas, from Texas into New Mexico these days. So we're seeing a huge, lots of stresses on our surrounding clinics in other states. And so, Robin, you talked to, you're really in touch with so many other clinics across the country. You talk to other people who do similar things that you are doing. Can you tell us about some of these issues that the clinics in other states are going through and how we can help them during this time?
Yeah, so obviously right now we have the states that have a lot of pressure on them. Colorado is one. Um, as you mentioned, New Mexico, North Carolina is seeing a lot of people now simply because of the fact that with South Carolina only able to do first trimester and Georgia is 6 weeks. So for people, because it's getting so backed up, North Carolina is the earliest stop for them, especially once they start getting into the second trimester. Florida also is only first trimester right now and is literally the only state in the Southeast that has any legal abortion at all. So those are states that are finding it really difficult to keep up with the amount of patients that are coming in. Honestly, I think the biggest crisis that we're facing, especially in the Southeast right now and the Gulf area, is the fact that we didn't just lose our clinics, we lost our healthcare providers. So this is an area that already did not expand Medicaid. This is an area that's already seen a lot of their rural hospitals shut down. And now this was already an area that honestly did not have hardly any Planned Parenthood representation as it was either. So for a lot of people, now that the abortion clinics have mostly closed in these areas too, there's no place for them to go. At this point, there were 5 clinics. Alabama's actually doing fairly well. There were 5 abortion clinics. And only one of them closed. The other 3, 2 were Planned Parenthoods, and then our 2 independent providers are staying open to provide maternal care and other sexual health care. But there's nothing in Mississippi anymore. There's nothing in Florida until you get over to Tallahassee. There's there's nothing in Louisiana anymore, I believe. I think Louisiana's all gone. So we're not just talking about a lack of places for people to go to prevent pregnancy in order to not need an abortion, but one of the things that we're seeing is that people who are traveling out of state to get care, they're not going to be able to stay in that state indefinitely. And so they go, they get care, they come home. And if they need any sort of follow-up, either just to confirm everything was okay, or in some cases, yes, they do have complications, they don't have any place to go get care that is safe for them. We recently saw a patient who had an abortion, a procedural abortion in South Carolina, and then was referred to us because she was having fever and funky discharge. And so it was pretty clear that there must have been something retained. There was some infection happening, but she went to her hospital, which it was a rural area. So there's one hospital. And in order to help provide information to make sure that she was getting well cared for, she told them she had a procedural abortion in South Carolina, and they wouldn't examine her. Like, we had to phone in antibiotics for her that she could get, and then try to figure out what other sort of care we could provide from away, because her own hospital would not see her. And when you just have one hospital, there is no other option. So we're talking about all of the states that are seeing abortion tourism, or whatever you want to call it, and getting this influx. But what we don't talk about is the fact that these people are all going to come home. And what happens when they come home and they don't have anyone that they can see if they need someone?
Yeah, absolutely.
If I could follow up on that one, if
Yeah.
you have a doctor, if you had the situation that you just described and that hospital refused to see that patient, that refusal is a violation of the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor
And
Act
that's
under
the problem,
federal
is
law.
that we can't get our patients to file a complaint. So then we have to ask ourselves, do we file the complaint knowing that something could happen to that hospital that closes that hospital down? Because we're on the brink right now in Alabama. That was the only hospital for an hour in any direction. So what, like, it's the same issue that we had back in the old days, in the pre-Dobbs days, when we started asking ourselves, what is worse, a bad abortion clinic or no abortion clinic? Because providers knew that there were clinics out there that were not good abortion clinics. Do you go and tell somebody and have that place shut down before they kill someone? Or do you just keep letting it go because you know that if you get rid of that, then people are going to travel another 3-4 hours in order to try and get care? There's no good option there, and you're just trying to figure out what's the least amount of harm.
One suggestion on that one is call the CEO of the hospital. They are afraid of EMTALA. They may listen to you and recognize that what went on in the ER was not right.
Interesting.
And they would look into it. At least that's what goes on a regular basis with my clients. And they don't get shut down when they're investigated over that. They figure out what they're doing wrong, they fix it. And I think they would listen.
Oh God, I hope so, because we have a file like this thick of all of the bad things that the doctors and the hospitals have done to women who end up showing up at our clinic now.
Wow. So Louise, I was going to ask you a question next, and we touched a little bit on it earlier, but how do we protect the OBGYNs right now in the time after Roe when they're dealing with a mom who's miscarrying? Because I'm seeing a lot of politicians threatening online to put them in jail and to send them to prison. And then there is legislation these days in some states that say that if they care for anybody having an abortion or like a miscarriage that isn't, I don't know, filed correctly or something, or it can be misconstrued in some way, that they can go to prison. And this is really starting, I think, to affect doctors, because my girlfriends, we all got together recently and we were talking about how many OBGYNs have been leaving the practices in Texas. I mean, it's pretty startling to have these huge practices with like sending out announcements that 3 and 4 doctors are leaving their practice and moving to Colorado.
We were afraid that that was going to be the outcome here, is that physicians are going to be afraid to practice in Texas because they're too much at risk professionally, psychologically. I mean, and it isn't even just physicians. I mean, you could have individuals who are genetic counselors who are afraid, it's like, what's the point of doing genetic counseling for a pregnant couple when I really have no options to give them about the fact that they have a severe fetal anomaly that has now been identified, yet it can't be dealt with in Texas. And so that level of frustration and that kind of practice ends up either taking practitioners that we already have in the state, that we already have in too few in numbers. It's difficult to get those to find good genetic counseling in Texas, even in our large academic medical centers. So they won't come here, they'll leave here. I'd heard from some hospitals that were trying to recruit physicians into local practices because the population in Texas is booming. We are doing well business-wise. We have people entering the state all the time, and the doctor's offices are already, like, of all ranges of specialties, you have a hard time getting in. Well, you really have a hard time getting in with OBGYN care. And so I think we're still seeing, I think the only thing that could help us is if we got legislative, some relief for them so that there's more certainty in their ability to practice and protection of them when they're practicing, that they can care for women. That the idea of, how close to death do I have to have this person be, or how close, like how bad does the emergency have to be before I can intervene when it's to protect them? I mean, in like all of these cases where it's really difficult, these are people that wanted to have their pregnancies. They're people that would want to go on and get pregnant again more quickly, and just the delay of care and the damage that's done from waiting as far, like to receive care if they've ended up experiencing hemorrhages or experiencing more permanent damage or scarring or whatever from having endured an infection or the threat of the infection. I mean, it's causing women to be really careful about, do I get pregnant now? What's the risk I'm going to experience? So I think we've got a concern, and we're not going to see it. I don't know. I'd be curious if Blake has a comment about, I haven't gotten to dig into the maternal mortality statistical report that got released in December, but we're not looking good in Texas. I mean, my last view was, I think the statistic that you looked at, I think it was like 34.3 deaths of pregnant women in 100,000 births. It's 4.3 in California, and we're at 34.3 in Texas. So,
Wow. Yeah, I was tracking that number. So let's turn it over to Blake, and maybe he might have some insight on the maternal mortality report that was just released here in January, like a couple weeks ago. Do you have any insight on anything with this report at all?
I don't really. I have to say that there hasn't been a major improvement in that rate per 100,000 pregnant people. I do know that is animating some of the policy discussion at the Capitol, and really when it comes to expanding Medicaid coverage for 12 months postpartum. They really want that to be the solution for ending maternal mortality, but we know it's far more than that. Like, it's a multifaceted problem of healthcare disparity, and like just providing Medicaid coverage for a little while longer isn't going to solve the problem. So we're really looking at some other solutions. I don't know how much traction they'll gain, but a doula pilot program to help women throughout their pregnancy and childbirth, to be advocates for them in our healthcare system, and some other ideas. But certainly we haven't changed the trajectory of maternal mortality in Texas yet. So that'll be an issue where I think there'll be some, hopefully, movement on some more resources anyway for pregnant Texans.
Yeah, one thing that I just want to let people know about, and we can all talk about it too. Texas just released that maternal mortality report, and it only went through 2021. It didn't go through 2022. So we only saw the changes that I saw that were significant in my point of view were the ones that had to do with Latina women who were pregnant with COVID, because we saw the death rates for them a little bit higher than expected. That was one of the things that really stuck out in that report to me. But we didn't see the effects of Dobbs just yet. I mean, this stuff is coming. It's coming at us fast. We don't even see it yet. And we, should be aware of that it's coming, and also should be aware that the medical codes may be different as such that we might not even get the whole answer, because they might code a death in a different code, and it may be because of a miscarriage or abortion, but the way they code it in a medical facility might affect the reporting.
I think one of the things we have to think about when we're looking at how abortion bans impact maternal mortality is the fact that it's not like a direct correlation, as in, okay, abortion shut off and now we're having higher maternal mortality. It's one of those things that increases exponentially, because once you no longer have the ability to space your children out, once you have a pregnancy and you don't have enough time to get healthy, or you're not getting any sort of preventative care because nobody thinks that you deserve any sort of health care unless you are pregnant, that is how it starts to exacerbate and go over and over and over again. And especially when we know that people who are in poverty tend to get pregnant more often because they can't get access to birth control. Having more children puts you into poverty. And so that cycle continues on and on as well. So I think that we're going to have to be prepared to be ready for this idea that the first year or two, people are gonna be like, oh, look, it really wasn't that bad. See, you thought that the sky was gonna fall, there were gonna be dead pregnant people all over the place, and really it's not that bad. Everything's almost exactly the same. But what we're gonna see in 5-10 years, that is going to be devastating.
You know what's interesting, Robin, is one of my friends, her father was a general practitioner in East Texas. He told his daughter, the 10 years of that, what I saw with treating my patients the 10 years before Roe and the 10 years after Roe were a huge difference and a huge benefit to women following Roe. And he's seeing that like full arc that you just mentioned of what it meant overall for the care of the women that he was providing services to. And here's a point that I think we all need to remember. Her father's dead. The healthcare providers who knew what it was like before Roe, they are for the most part gone. Roe was decided in January of 1973. So I did a little search of our Supreme Court justices. Would you like to know how old they were and how much experience they had pre-Roe? All right, 1948. Clarence Thomas was 24 when Roe was decided. How much experience do we think he had with how much the benefits were for people in his life? He's the oldest. We've got 17, 22, one of our, so 5, 7 years old. And then we even have one that wasn't even 1 when Roe was decided. The justices who were on the court when Roe was decided, they had 16 years on the bench, 14 years on the bench, 5, 2, 1, 33. That's the experience. Those 7 that decided Roe had a lifetime of experience. They probably had first or second hand experience of people who were harmed with the pre-Roe laws. So we lost that because I'm 61. I had no pre-Roe experience. And that's where we are.
I like you, Louise. You're fun. I'm glad we got to do this together.
Exactly. One of the things that surprised me when I was doing research for this webinar was that when Roe v. Wade passed, Texas actually protected maternal mortality. They protected women who were, victims of rape and incest. But now we've gone to such an extreme. We don't even protect these things anymore. And it's like they were there, when Roe v. Wade was happening, but now those protections are just gone. And it blows my mind when I think about it. So I just, I wanted to ask you all, especially Blake, maybe you can take this one, but how do we get the ledge to make exceptions for incest and rape during this ledge session right now? Because it's just maddening to think that we don't have those exceptions.
I think what's really interesting is it's also a result of a more fractured democratic process. If you ask people, even people who self-identify as anti-abortion or pro-life, about some of these specific policy prescriptions like complete abortion bans, they're not popular. They don't, people's identification and their own shame and stigma about abortion and what they've been told is right or wrong is far different from what their actual policy preferences are. But they don't, for whatever reason, they vote for folks who in this area don't agree with them 100%, and it's a trade-off they're willing to make for a ton of other reasons of why they vote the way they do, right? So we've ended up here by having gerrymandered districts. So you have in smaller primary turnout. So you have people like Ken Paxton winning the Republican primary and then being elected statewide, when his policy preferences on abortion and reproductive health care don't match the majority of, not just the majority of the electorate, the majority of the people that self-identified Republicans. So it's an issue of kind of a democratic fracturing. Also, the extremism is right, the lack of those exceptions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'm going to open it up for questions yet, but I have one last question for three of you, and this is it. How in the world did we get here? Because I was reading your all's bios and I read Robin's book, and oh my gosh, Robin, each one of you all, you guys saw this overturning of Roe v. Wade way before it happened, years before it happened. You saw it coming. So I wanted to talk to you all about it and have each of you guys talk about how you predicted the end of Roe before Dobbs. What led to some of these insights? How did you start putting these pieces together? And just tell us a little bit about, like, did you sound alarms? Did you not sound alarms? Like, how are you processing all these things that we've been like experiencing, very slowly, but in your mind, you all, each one of you had the foresight to probably see it coming much quicker than the rest of us did. So let's start with Robin.
So in 2019, the book The End of Roe v. Wade came out, but that was actually a remake of a 2013 book that Jessica Mason-Piccolo from Rewire News and I wrote that was called Crow After Roe, which was a terrible, terrible title. And we regret a lot of things about that book, especially that part. But we put that book together really quickly, and it was published in, I want to say, January of 2013, because we had seen for the couple years prior, these model bills that all of a sudden were introduced right after the Tea Party victory in 2010. So we knew that there were anti-abortion groups that were specifically creating model legislation with the idea that they would put it in as many states as possible, try to use them to make court circuit splits, and then that way be able to get a case that went straight before the Supreme Court so that they could overturn Roe v. Wade. When they did it originally, they were much more gentle bills, because what they were trying to do was persuade Anthony Kennedy to be the swing vote and come over and say, okay, Roe was wrongly decided. The whole idea of viability was wrongly decided. Let's get rid of that and think of something else instead. And so that's why we started off with these 20-week bans, because they were supposed to just barely change what the perception was of legality of abortion, but would get rid of the idea of viability. And then you would see the anti-abortion movement already had all these studies queued up and such that said, oh yeah, we're going to do fetal pain now instead. Oh, it turns out that there's fetal pain at 14 weeks. Oh, well, actually it's 8 weeks. Hey, it turns out that we see it at 6 weeks, and keep rolling it back further and further and further. So that's why we knew all the way back then. Then when Anthony Kennedy announced that he was retiring, we're like, oh shit, now here it is. They're not even going to try and do these little tiny steps anymore. They're just going to go all the way. And it didn't take them long to do it.
Yeah, it absolutely didn't. All right. Louise?
I guess I don't know that, there are some true believers on this abortion issue on the anti-abortion side. But when it comes to a political issue, I think it was just viewed as a way to gather up more votes to a particular party, and they saw it as an opportunity to get people under their tent that they weren't getting otherwise, and to keep them there. And in some ways, I think, you wonder if it was the dog that caught the bumper of the car, because when it's accomplished, how do you keep people in the tent? So now what we have is the Texas legislature trying to go, oh, we need more abortion stuff, don't we? We need something else that we didn't do. Let's try to make clear that you can't help people. Let's try to make clear that if you are a corporation that's come to Texas and you've got tax incentives for this, you can't pay for any abortions in state or out of state for your employees. And whether these are set piece bills that are just there that won't go anywhere but look like you're trying to do more with abortion, I thought the heartbeat bill was a set piece bill. I didn't think anybody would pass it. And because we've seen stuff like that out there. So somebody could look, I've got my anti-abortion bill, but it wouldn't ever go anywhere. And we saw in the 2021 session, lots of bills, just like open carry and constitutional carry passed. I don't know how many years that had been around. So
Yeah, absolutely. Blake?
Yeah, I think, or the other thing is, like Louise alluded to, the legislators proposing the bills weren't as clued into the national strategy. They knew they wanted it for the political advantages it had, but really didn't understand that may actually take effect. So they were also very secure in the comfort of having Roe as a floor for reproductive rights, and that they could propose whatever and then have it not actually take effect. So never really take the downside, a political hit of having a policy that most people disagreed with take effect. And that's not the case anymore. I think you're seeing beyond sort of specific abortion stuff is that, the people that do abortion activism, anti-abortion activism, are absolutists, right? So they do want to, there's this like big kerfluffle about, not, the anti-abortion movement doesn't really want to criminalize women, right? And that's bullshit. Like, of course they do, right? They are not afraid to do anything that will prevent abortion because they're absolutists, right? And once you like can reframe yourself that they are really true believers and there's nothing more important than that fetus, and they're willing to do anything to stomp on other constitutional rights, whether that's the right to travel, the right to information, the right to free speech, the right to associate, then you can see where they're coming from, right? And so it's all in service of that. But I think we're also seeing a rehashing is not the right word, but rejuvenation of the hate towards LGBTQ people and trans folks. Like, that's the new culture war thing, is all of the anti-trans legislation we're seeing, and the criminalization of gender affirming healthcare as well, right? And the other thing I'll say is that beyond being absolutist, at a certain point, it's business, and the abortion lobby has to justify its existence. They didn't just close up shop because Roe ended, right? They're still like got to figure out how they're going to make their paycheck, right? So they're finding all these other little ways, like Louise described. Well, maybe we'll not let companies who provide reproductive health care in their benefit plan get tax incentives, right? So that they can beat that hobby horse. Or maybe we won't let cities and counties provide logistical support services for abortion, right? So they got to find somebody to hate and some abortion thing to protect to justify their existence.
Well, and following what Blake said, it makes sense that we go from abortion rights to anti-LGBTQ legislation, because it's all the same spectrum of people not following into the particular gender roles that they believe that people should be in. So of course they don't like abortion because it's unnatural to not want to be pregnant and give birth. Of course they don't like trans people because they're not being the sex that they were assigned at birth. Of course they don't like all of these things because they all go against what they see as societal norms, where you have male and you have female, and men act masculine and women act feminine, and men go to work and women make babies, and this is how it has been and always should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're tearing down the 14th Amendment. I mean, that's really what they're trying to do. They're trying to tear down the 14th Amendment to give states more power and stuff. So that's a little bit concerning.
Well, and that's one of the things I tell everybody is you have to keep your eye on Alabama. Alabama was the first state, and so far the only state that passed a personhood amendment. So personhood is enshrined in our state constitution. It was the first state that passed a total no exceptions abortion ban. And now it is the first state that's openly saying, okay, by the way, we're going to prosecute the women who are having abortions. And if you watch what the attorney general is doing, he is basically removing the state from any sort of federal law. So when the Obama administration says, okay, veterans hospitals are going to be able to provide very limited abortions under these very specific circumstances, he said, no, I'm going to arrest any doctor who does that. And the thing is, and here's a confession about my own parenting, I am a horrible parent. And one of the things that absolutely terrifies me is that at some point, one of my kids is going to realize I really can't tell him what to do. Because I have really stubborn little boys. I have a girl who's wonderful, but I have these really stubborn little boys that like sometimes one of them just like does not want to go to school. And he's like, you can't make me. And so I drag him to the bus and I'm going to put him on the bus. But in the back of my head, I'm like, but I really can't make him. So what if he just like sat on the ground and refused to go? And he realizes that I don't really have the power to make him do something. He has to put some effort into it. That's what it's like between Alabama and the federal government, because the federal government keeps telling Alabama, you need to do this. You need to use this money for COVID. No, we're going to build prisons out of it. You need, like, that's what Alabama does. And the state is like, you can't tell us what to do. And the federal government's like, oh shit, you're right. You really can't. We don't have anything to hold over you. There's nothing we can do here. And so that's what it's like when Alabama is its own little nation. And I'm terrified that all of these other red states are going to start following its lead and say, hey, it's true. The United States really can't do anything to us.
Yeah. So Blake, there was a question for you in the chat, and it says, Texas Impact, the organization which represents many denominations and religious organizations throughout Texas, has decided to support reproductive justice in Texas. This is a major step for the group. I was suggesting that we lobby for rape and incest exception. Does that make sense?
No, I would aim higher, right? Like okay. why are we, gonna spend effort to do the lobbying, grassroots lobbying for Texas Impact on something that may be helpful but maybe ineffective. I mean, it's okay to. I'm not saying don't support those exceptions. You should support them, and they'll. If they pass, certainly provide folks care that need it, or at least help them get access to care. But we need so much more. So that I would say that shouldn't be the focus of your lobbying efforts. That you should really focus on other stuff, and that can be, you can say you support that, but it's sort of a trap to allow anti-abortion politicians off the hook for now supporting ineffective exceptions. So don't fall into that trap to let them get a bunch of credit and plaudits and kudos from the media for being like, oh, we softened this thing when it's not what we need. It's not gonna,
Yeah. So what advice would you give Mothers Against Greg Abbott? Because we have this huge group. We're going to be lobbying at the Capitol. We have a lobbying day coming up on May the 4th. And yes, that's like May the 4th be with you. We're going to lobby that day. Very excited about it. We're going to be the mom force instead of Star Wars. But what could we do as an organization to assist and help you and to show up in a force to help lobbying for reproductive rights, women's health care, LGBTQ rights? What would aim higher look like from your point of view, Blake?
I think we're gonna see some bills that are, repeals of the bans, and I don't think those are going anywhere. But I think, because birth control and contraception hasn't been the subject of a ton of controversy or been banned or whatever. I think a lot of folks take for granted how easy and accessible it is to get effective contraception, and it's not in Texas, and it's not if you're relying on Medicaid for your health care or if you are uninsured. So there are some proposals to expand access to contraception, and I think that's an important maybe thing to do also. So that looks like allowing young people to access contraception without parental consent. It looks like providing and paying for contraception in the CHIP program, in the Children's Health Insurance Program, making sure that the family planning and women's health program budget is increased, and it is increased in the base budget. So making sure that the folks that you lobby know that you are watching that and know that it's important. It's sometimes a little bit of a technical thing because it's a line item in the budget, and the programs are run with lots of administrative complications in some ways. Supporting some sort of free choice of provider so that any provider, even if they will refer someone for abortion care if they need it, can participate in those women's health programs, the family planning programs. Those are my ideas. And obviously being opposed to bills that criminalize supporting people getting out of state for abortion care, and certainly opposing anything that criminalizes the pregnant people for self-managing their own abortion. Right now, that remains beyond prosecution, but it could change. I haven't seen those proposals, but certainly possible.
Okay. Oh, right. So, Robin, one of my favorite surprises in your book was that you talked about how we can be abortion activists during this time. I thought that was really important in your book because, so often here in Texas, we just feel defeated, like, gosh, what can we do? We have nothing left. Like, do we really need to go do another march? What can we do? So I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit about some of the recommendations that you put in your book about how we can continue to be activists for abortion and reproductive justice, even though we are living in a post-Roe America.
So one of the things that I think is unbelievably important right now is, first of all of the legislation that Blake was talking about. In Alabama, we're about to meet with our legislator. We know nothing's going to go anywhere, but we are introducing a Pregnant Person Dignity Act, which is essentially a bill that just says that because we know that pregnant people don't have access to healthcare because of the racial and economic disparities, because of the lack of Medicaid, there is a high likelihood that people will miscarry. And since abortion is illegal, they will be investigated for that. So we want the state to promise that they will not investigate any person for a poor pregnancy outcome. So that's one that we're going to be introducing, as well as in Alabama, you cannot get birth control. All Title X funding goes specifically to county health departments. So that's the only place that a person can go in order to get free or low-cost birth control. So we're introducing a bill to have that repealed so that that money can go to other family planning places, hopefully our clinic. But so getting involved in the legislature and lobbying is unbelievably important right now. Also, get as involved as you can locally. We know that obviously anti-abortion activists are trying to work on a federal ban, but Texas, of all states, is obviously aware of the fact that local organization by anti-abortion forces is really, really predominant. So get involved in your city council races, get involved in your zoning disputes, make sure that you are involved at every local level of government. When anti-abortion activists lost the 2008 elections and lost the House and the Senate and the White House, that was when they turned to the states and they took over most of the states. And when the left was like, oh, hey, they came for the states, so we need to start looking at that, then they started going for all their city councils. We are still trying to follow behind. And as you can tell, now everybody's moved on to the school boards. So we can't leave our local races unchallenged. We have to make sure that we're involved in our neighborhoods, making sure that that education and non-discriminatory policies are at every level, from your neighborhood all the way up. I highly recommend, and I always get in trouble for this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I highly recommend that every person at some point go hit up aidaccess.org and order themselves a set of pills. Do that from a place where you are using a private browser. Hide your info, keep them on hand because it takes weeks for them to show up. Make sure that you know different places like if, when, how in their legal reproductive health line in case there is a need for a lawyer. But the reality is that for most people who order this online and have it sent to them, if they have it on hand and if they know that the person that might need it is somebody that they know and trust, there isn't a lot of legal risk there. We know obviously that these legal risks are more for a person who is a person of color, Black or brown, low income, all of that. But at this point, I think that we also realize that carrying a pregnancy to term is something that can risk a person's life. And as such, abortion is a human right, and it is a major health risk to have any pregnancy. Every person who is going through that health risk should do it willingly. And so because of that, it is the morally right thing to do to help provide somebody with a way to terminate safely. So let's see, lobbying, breaking the law, make sure that if you do have health centers that are in your area, try to support them in any way that you can. Some of us are really struggling and we're trying really hard. Also make sure that you are fighting for sex ed. For the love of God, fight for sex ed in your local communities. I can't even begin to tell you how horrifying it is to realize how many people come into my clinic that don't even know how they got pregnant exactly, because they still don't entirely understand how human bodies work. And that's purposeful because our government wants people ignorant because they're easier to control. Make sure that people, one of the things that I'm really into right now, and this will be my last thing, is I'm really into guerrilla marketing. So we're starting to do things where we just like take QR codes to the Plan B pill or plancpills.org site, which provides information on all sorts of how to get pills legally, how to get pills not legally, what you need to do, who to reach out to, all of that. But what we just do is we get the QR code for it, and then we just put like little signs that say like pregnant, need help, and put them, or I can't believe this is so amazing, and then put them up, and they get torn down all the time. But I really encourage college campuses to do that because nobody can resist like going up to a QR code. And that's how we're spreading information right now, because let's be honest, there are a bunch of state legislatures that now think that spreading information is a really, really bad thing to do. And so spreading it without getting caught is really empowering.
I love that idea. I'm going to tell all of my Gen Z friends to do that.
It's fun. I love it.
Yeah, I love that idea.
If you put them on the light poles and stuff, and then you use tape over it, it's even harder for them to get the stickers back off.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good point. Now, I'm a mother of teenagers, and so I mean, you know, being prepared, teaching sex ed in school, all of these things are super important to me. I can't believe that, I mean, growing up, I got sex ed taught in school, but my kids haven't. They're 16 and 17 and they haven't. It's terrible. This is not the way it should be. And sometimes, you know, not every parent wants to be the person that teaches this to them. And not every parent's going to be as responsible as like myself and my husband, but you know, kids need options and they need to have it taught by somebody who knows how to teach it. and who has experience teaching and can make it fun to learn that for them. You know what I mean? Not how do you know fun? How do you learn something uncomfortable in a fun way? But
yeah, and if you ever want to know if you've taught them enough when they start going, Mom, it's okay, I already know about sex. You told me all about sex. I know everything about sex. Can we stop talking about sex? That's how I know that my job with my 15-year-old daughter is done.
oh yeah, there you go. I think that's great advice. So Louise, do you have anything left to say of like different things that our group can do right now to support women's reproductive justice?
I think as much as we can in our very short legislative session, if you can bring your voices for those of us who are in Texas to your legislature, even if your legislator is an anti-abortion person, just be on record with them so that they're hearing from other voices. And I know Tina Hester was on here. Our legislator is, our representative is Vicki Goodwin, and I'm going to give a shout out for Vicki Goodwin because she's actually running a how to go to the legislator camp, how to go to the Capitol, what to do, that I'm sure is not going to just be useful with regard to our district 47 in Texas, but all the districts. And so Vicki just put that up today, and I'll try and look for it real quick and put it in the chat because I think other people could benefit from the training she's going to provide.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know our time is up. We went a little bit over, but I really just want to say thank you so much to our panelists. We really appreciate you all being here with us today. Very insightful. If you guys please support some of these organizations here in Texas that like Jane's Due Process and Avow and Planned Parenthood that are doing the work supporting the women in the state of Texas. And then also donate to clinics like the one that Robin was working for, because we really need to help the South. I mean, the South has issues, we really need to help lots of multiple states across the South so the women that live in the South can have health care. It's just super duper important that we do that. So I cannot thank you all enough for meeting with us today. I don't know if anybody has do you all have anything else you'd like to say before we close out? Does anyone have anything else that they'd like to share?
I just want to say I'm proud of all y'all. Like I said at the beginning, you have been fighting this longer than anyone, and your stamina and your ability to fight back is just inspiring. And I did put my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me for anything, any of you, and I am always here to help.
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, if you all have a time, our activist book club this month, we chose Robin Marty's book, and we also chose the other book about, the Janes documentary, the book based on the Janes, they're both really excellent. They go really well together. It's so easy to read. It is inspiring, has lots of great information out there. And I'm actually going to give this to my teenage daughter, because I think it's really important that she has resources that she knows about and that she can share with her friends as she grows up. So anyways, everyone needs to get a copy. Also, the copies are free right now. I will post it on Mothers Against Greg Abbott PAC, and I'll try to post it again, even on Twitter. But right now, there is a free online copy of this book that is available to everybody. So once again, oh, there we go. Thank you, Blake. Yeah, Blake put in the research study. What is this one, Blake? The Turnaway.
Well, it's what Louise mentioned. It was a longitudinal study of women who are denied abortions, and the results of that. And there, as to no one's great surprise, they end up with greater rates of poverty, other socioeconomic issues, other bad determinants of health, all sorts of other things, less likely to complete their education and all sorts of stuff. So it's the definitive current study of what really happens when people can't access abortion care. I was going to say one last thing. If you're part of other professional organizations that also have a lobby arm, whether that's TMA or the Nurses Association or the Realtors or really anyone else, they all do lobbying and have relationships with folks at the Capitol. Tell them you don't appreciate their organizational support for the anti-abortion folks and ask them to be, especially the medical organizations, ask them to be stronger advocates for abortion access. Because that's another way we've really lost our way in Texas is those organizations have become subsidiaries of the Republican Party and not really advocating for the physicians and medical students they should be advocating for.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Blake, can you send me information on how we can help Avow with lobbying this session? Because we would love to team up and let our members know different ways that they could support your group. So
absolutely, and not just Avow, there's several different repro orgs doing different lobby days. I'll send you a whole list of dates to come help.
That would be great because we're on it and we'll be there. We're going to show up for you guys. Just tell us what color t-shirt to wear and what to do. We'll be there. Absolutely. So I really appreciate it. So thank you so much to Blake and Louise and Robin. I really appreciate you all meeting with us tonight. This was so informative. I think I learned so much from every single one of you all tonight. So I'm so excited to share this with the group. And I think everyone's going to just get a lot of really great information. So I appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your evening with us, and we will see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks.